How Billy hates his own identity, you see. He always has, and he thinks that makes him a transsexual. But his pathology is 1,000 times more savage and more terrifying. He wants to be reborn, you see. How Billy wants to be reborn, Clarice. And he will be reborn.
Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers' hit song American Girl blasts from a car radio as a female driver sings along during this moment of independence. By conventional standards of beauty reinforced by Hollywood movies, she would be seen as overweight. But her weight matters not. It's the woman inside that matters. Her name is Catherine Martin, and she truly embodies the American girl, or American woman, rather. But what exactly does being a woman in America really look like, as portrayed by The Silence of the Lambs? For Catherine and the other victims, being an American woman means being subjected to abuse, being controlled, and being violated simply for having this body. Sure, the injustices are not true sexual crimes in context, but the subtext is surely there. For Clarice Starling, the film's protagonist, being an American woman means facing sexism and unwanted sexualization wherever she goes. Sometimes it is overt and sometimes it is subtle, but it is always present and manifest in different forms. In every other situation, the men call attention to her beauty or femininity and hit on her, whether the context is appropriate or not.
You know, we get a lot of detectives here, but I must say I can't ever remember one as attractive.
You ever go out for cheeseburgers and beer? The amusing house wine?
Are you hitting on me, Doctor?
Yes.
She visits cannibalistic serial killer Hannibal Lecter at his place of confinement. It initially seems to be a defining moment of independence in her FBI training, but everyone hones in on her gender and sex. The head of the asylum hits on Clarice, and says her boss, Jack Crawford, sent her there as bait for Lecter, seeing how attractive she is.
I don't believe Lecter's even seen a woman in 8 years. And oh, are you ever his taste, so to speak.
The guards of the asylum stare her down. The patient Miggs yells out to her that he smells her cunt, and as she comes face to face with Hannibal Lecter, his eyes barely move and barely blink. The male gaze could never be more prevalent.
He said, I can smell your cunt.
I see. I myself cannot.
Even with a glass barrier separating the two, his power from within the cell is overwhelming. He insults her and picks her brain, not only for her femininity, but also for her class background that she desperately tries to move away from. On her way out, Miggs masturbates to her and flings his semen into her hair. Lecter shouts out to her and demands she come back to him. He apologizes for Miggs' behavior, and it is at this point he desires to help her. It is at this point, after she is demeaned and dehumanized, that the two form a bond. She leaves and is reminded of her past and is brought to tears. She has made it this far, but the world keeps breaking her. Not all forms of sexism are conscious, though. At her place of work, she is treated differently from men. Crawford means well, but his actions are sexist in nature. After being cast aside when he discusses a potential sex crime, she tells him that his rhetoric sets an example. No matter what his intentions are, optics are important.
Sheriff, this type of sex crime has certain aspects I just as soon discuss in private. You know what I mean?
Matters, Mr. Crawford. Cops look at you to see how to act. Matters.
Point taken.
And this is what brings us to some of the more objectionable and arguably dated aspects of the film. Let us address the somewhat paradoxical arguments I often seen thrown around towards the character of Jame Gumb, also known as Buffalo Bill. Two seemingly contrasting arguments towards Gumb are brought up into contemporary discourse. 1. Gumb demonizes transgender people by association. 2. Gumb is a transgender woman and is misgendered throughout the film. Let's look at the first argument. According to the film, Jame Gumb is in fact not transsexual, or transgender in modern terms. This is made abundantly clear.
There's no correlation in the literature between transsexualism and violence. Transsexuals are very passive.
Billy is not a real transsexual.
While the film goes out of its way on multiple occasions to firmly state that they should not actually be seen as trans, general audiences are too short-sighted to properly engage in the text and leave the film with this information.
Social acceptance in sexual frustration, sir.
No, he covets.
Due to a severe lack of proper positive representation of transgender women in media, and a history of gender nonconformity being associated with serial killers, think Norman Bates in Psycho, who is also not meant to be trans.
He's a transvestite.
Not exactly.
Silence of the Lambs, while arguably in good faith, may have added more damage simply due to its success in mainstream appeal. It adds to the stigma, no matter its attempts to actively challenge transphobic and homophobic readings.
I was about to go through transition, and I worked up the courage to tell one of my colleagues, and she looked at me and she goes, "You mean like Buffalo Bill?" Like, her only point of reference was this disgusting, psychotic serial killer who hunts women in order to kill them and skin them in order to wear their bodies, to literally appropriate the female form, which is exactly like the feminist argument against the existence of trans women, is that we're trying to appropriate the female form, and here he was doing it literally. But the fact that that was her only reference point, that that was her only template for understanding was a sick, psychotic serial killer. It hurts. It just hurts.
Now let's look over the second common argument. I recall being caught off guard when I first heard this posed a while back.
The Silence of the Lambs features a transgender character named Buffalo Bill. She kills overweight women in hopes of making a woman suit to complete her transition. Hannibal Lecter claims that Buffalo Bill is not actually transgender, and all characters misgender Bill throughout the film.
While this did prompt me to explore the discourse surrounding the film more, there was an innate disgust upon hearing this. How can one claim a mentally deranged neo-Nazi serial killer who seeks to sew together a suit made of dead women should in fact be recognized as an actual transgender woman? The red flags were raised. As the film argues, trans people are passive, non-violent, and do not wish to covet what belongs to others, in this case the bodies of cisgender female victims. Initially, I thought it was a rather gross conflation to argue for the validity in their female identity, but perhaps there is some room for the argument. We must ask ourselves, at what point can we really truly deny someone of their identity? Is it truly unreasonable to make the judgment call of the mentally deranged and violent? If a person is using their identity to prey on and hurt others, feed their delusions and depraved desires, is there room for it to be challenged or questioned? Perhaps, though, these very questions are only applicable to select contexts and people. Perhaps the very posing of these questions can itself contribute to tired arguments against personal identities. But when we are presented with a text that is such a cultural touchstone that asks of us to evaluate identity and transformation, it is a little difficult to assess it in good faith otherwise. But one thing to consider is how powerful art is. With image comes meaning, whether it be intended or derived. Even if there were conscious efforts to rectify transphobia and an attempt to divorce it from insensitivity, that doesn't mean there isn't unconscious engagement nevertheless. After all, simply by denying the character of their transgender status contributes to a long-withstanding transphobic trope. That being, this cross-dressing psychopath that reminds you of hysterical transgender stereotypes and codes gender nonconformity as evil isn't really trans. They are a fake. An imposter. Denial of someone's gendered status, even within fiction, is often itself a form of transphobia.
With Buffalo Bill, it's a little different. You'll find that he had a close relationship or desired a close relationship with his mother, but his mother rejected him. So in his fantasy, he's trying to recreate himself into something he is not.
Billy is not a real transsexual, but he thinks he is. He tries to be. He's tried to be a lot of things, I expect. Billy hates his own identity, you see, and he thinks that makes him a transsexual. But his pathology is 1,000 times more savage and more terrifying.
Recently, after getting heat for engaging in and interacting with transphobia on Twitter, author J.K. Rowling published a book about a cross-dressing serial killer that murders women. That, by the way, totally definitely isn't trans, she assures you. Do you see the issue here? Even if we grant people the liberty of expression and freedom of speech, it does not mean that their work does not have negative social implications that should be treated uncritically.
Incidentally, the folks who have complained that the film unfairly portrays transsexuals and homosexuals are idiots, just trying to use the popularity of the movie as a platform for their own socio-political self-interest campaigns. Those people know very well that their allegations are unfounded because the film specifically refutes it in dialogue. And for those paying attention, there are pictures of Buffalo Bill with lap dancers in his basement, so it seems he's not even gay. Bisexual maybe, but according to these pictures, he likes his women. Unless the women he's seen with here are transsexuals themselves.
Regardless of how good or likable one finds it to be, it does not mean that the text doesn't employ or reinforce harmful or contentious ideas. Medical gatekeeping was especially commonplace at the time, and the film reinforces the narrative that some trans people may not actually be trans people, because they are just confused.
I wouldn't be surprised if Billy had applied for sex reassignment at one or all of them and been rejected.
On what basis would they reject him?
Doctors denying individuals the right to undergo reassignment procedures is, for many trans people, a form of dehumanization, as is the constant demonizing of them in media, arguably including this film. Though no, I do not think this film is actually designed with the conscious intention for it to be for trans-exclusionary radical feminist, or TERFs as they're called. But one can surely apply a successful TERF reading to the text. Doing so may miss out on key points and ideas conveyed here that completely challenge and undermine TERF ideology, even if it's also susceptible to it. Then again, TERF ideology completely misses the point of everything anyway. That said, Silence of the Lambs favors cisgendered women by what is represented on the screen alone. As problematic as it may be, the film clearly wants us to separate transgenderism from this form of depravity as quickly as possible, for the film to move on with itself.
The significance of the moth is change. Caterpillar into chrysalis or pupa, and from thence into beauty. Our Billy wants to change too.
Beyond the more obvious cases of symbolism through lepidopteric motifs, there is plenty to be found here in gender itself, often coded with sex-specific imagery. Many films focus on the phallus, but here we direct our attention to the yonic motifs. The famous Goodbye Horses sequence cuts back and forth between Catherine attempting to escape the pit, as Jame Gumb dances naked in front of their video camera. The pit Catherine is in is deep and dark, and seeing that it is her female body that brings her here, it can be reasoned that the pit itself is vaginal in nature. She is trapped by her own womanhood, as it is being violated. Earlier on she screamed out upon seeing the sight of blood. And if she were to emerge out of the pit, she would symbolically be birthed, or miscarried. The juxtaposition of shots back and forth brings us to close-ups on Jame Gumb. They rhetorically ask us if we'd fuck them.
Would you fuck me?
As Buffalo Bill seeks physical and sexual transformation, Catherine wishes to escape from the pains she endures for being a woman. The sequence concludes as Gumb tucks their genitals in and embraces the image of their body for the camera. The scene has those troubling connotations, uncomfortably reinforcing stereotypical and dehumanizing associations to the public's perceptions of gender nonconforming individuals. Although we are not necessarily encouraged to be disgusted by transgenderism, but rather by depravity. The wig that Gumb wears is scalped from a woman's head. This is clearly unnecessary for their transition, if that's what it actually is. If Gumb can import rare moths from overseas, they surely could purchase a wig. What we witness here is disgusting because it poses a threat, not only to the cisgendered woman's body, but to transgender identity as well. This person is sick and takes matters too far. To battle her own demons, Clarice has personal investment in saving Catherine. She goes so far as to letting Lecter in on her personal life, and by chance, their last meeting ends as he brushes his finger against hers. The male gaze has turned to a mental hold on her, and concludes with physical touch. Like Jame Gumb, Lecter finds freedom by coveting the body parts of another person, but unlike Gumb, Lecter does not appear to be delusional, but instead intelligent. It may be overkill that he hangs the body of a police officer up as he did, but these transformations must be represented with some symbol. Clarice seeks metamorphosis and accomplishes it by saving Catherine. If Gumb is in fact male as the film claims them to be, the night vision goggles they use make sense. It is the male gaze weaponized against the woman. This psychopath hurts women and their bodies in order to validate themselves. As Gumb watches Clarice struggle in the dark, She hears her gun, a phallic symbol, cock. On impulse, she fires back against her presumed male aggressor. She reclaims her body from the supposedly masculine threat. Catherine is now saved, and light shines inside, completing Clarice's transformation. She now secures her place in society as a confident and independent American woman. As Clarice shakes Crawford's hand at the end, there's an expressed hope for the future, between men and women, to work together as equals. But perhaps this ending suggests something naive and short-sighted. Perhaps it is upholding a cisnormative paradigm, and the notion of liberal progress from women is a false one. After all, the woman's success is marked by assimilation into the man's space, in yet another contentious institution, and killing the existential threat to her womanhood. A threat that, while mentally insane, is arguably another American woman. But the film dares not acknowledge this. I still think it's great, though.
Just one more thing. Love your suit.
Special thanks to my patrons, Pseudo Moron, Yakovajanoy, George, Greg, and Kayla. Please let me know what you thought of this video in the comments below. If you like what I do, consider subscribing and sharing my work around. If you would like to see your name included in future videos, consider donating to my Patreon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
It rubs the lotion on its skin. It does this whenever it's told. It rubs the lotion on its skin, or else it gets the hose again.